Hi, this is Jim Brisson, and I'd like to talk to you today about organizational structures that can help or hurt your ability to be agile. Now, this is part one of three, so let's get started. Now, at small scale, Agile is well established and working reasonably well, but we're still struggling at large scale, and you may be watching this because you're seeing the same thing. Now, in my experience, organizations and Agile coaches too often focus on culture as the impediment and work on that first, when the organizational structure is a major problem preventing agility. Now, I'll try to show you in this video how inappropriate structure can hurt, and in subsequent videos I'll show you how to improve. So I'll first describe a generic large organization that has problems despite being agile. In the next video, I'll describe better examples of how to structure your organization. And in the last video, I'll briefly dive into organizational sociology and talk about that inverse Conway maneuver, and we can then update the large organization that had problems in part one. So I'll follow that with a brief summary. Now I have a few setup slides first. Now in Agile, it's common for product owners to be responsible for different parts of applications or systems, and that's all the people in this picture is trying to show. And product line engineering has been used in the past where there are groups of applications or systems that have related function. It was common to develop separate services or components to be reused by the related applications, and reuse was assumed to save effort, reduce maintenance, etc., and was to some degree successful. Now I often see large systems that are structured roughly like this. This system has several public-facing applications, including an app for salespeople, a public web application, a finance app so you can make 3 easy payments, and a portal for discount pricing to high-volume customers. And there are internal apps for manufacturing, warehousing, shipping, and so on. And there are components like catalog, pricing, and so on that may be shared by the various applications, the internal and external applications. So this picture basically follows the product line format I showed previously. Now this is a simplified organizational picture of the system since it only shows 5 of the applications when it's common to have as many as 20. Now the lines try to give an idea of requirements flow from applications into the reuse components. But there should be many lines. And the lines are actually more confusing than they look, and added confusion can come from attributes of these lines. Suspiciously similar requirements can come from different apps. And the same requirement, exact same requirement, can be requested by different apps that don't know that they're asking for the same thing. And sometimes the cost of a requirement is shared by applications, complicating funding and confusing who the requester is. And the applications also compete for reuse resources, but not always fairly. Bonuses can depend on getting work done, so processes and rules can be bypassed. Now an application may be dependent upon search, but search depends upon pricing, who in turn depends upon catalog, so requirements can cascade. But applications that depend upon the components don't want to understand what's below their dependency. So basically, requirements and dependencies are messy. There are also reasonable requests that cut across applications. When will my order be delivered? Now a salesman might contact the warehouse to ask if they have 20 widgets, only to find that 10 are in warehouse A and 6 are in warehouse C. Now a call to manufacturing reveals that 4 widgets will be in the warehouse X in 2 days. Now another call to warehousing gets all widgets to warehouse X in 2 days. A call to shipping then gets a delivery estimate. Now to automate all of this, a strategic initiative is created that affects all the software applications, and the PMO will package everything up into a project and manage that project. With many components, applications, and dependencies involved, the PMO retains a very important role. Now the PMO runs the project and gets separate funding, but the application developers do the work, which adds another layer of confusion. So now the initiative is competing with applications for the developer's time. and it's difficult to prioritize work from all these different sources. Developers are working on multiple goals, often in the same sprint. The reuse components typically have no understanding of why a requirement was requested, since it may be internal, or come from one or more applications, or from one or more initiatives. So developers learn to simply work on the requirements in front of them without any context or understanding. And that's bad. So the funding is also extremely difficult to unravel. Applications give money to reuse components, and strategic initiatives give funding to applications. But it would take a lot of extensive time logging on the part of developers to determine how money was spent. So many organizations simply give up and they really don't understand their costs or where the money is going. So let's take a closer look at where the organizational structure is going wrong. Now, Dunbar's number, briefly, is about the number of relationships we have where trust and reciprocal obligation are important. We have cognitive limits, and so we can maintain only so many of these relationships, maybe around 150. Probably there's a practical limit that's closer to 100. And villages and tribes repeatedly form around this size, not coincidentally. Startup companies have found that culture changes when growing beyond this size. And people communicate and coordinate well enough based on relationships in organizations that are smaller than Dunbar's number. Now, above Dunbar's number, trust and relationships are usually not sufficient. Some rules, meetings, procedures, and management are needed. With a low Dunbar number, autonomy works well, but when it gets higher, governance is needed. Now, in our large example, the PMO might be one Dunbar group. The applications have their own groups, and the reuse components have their own groups. So a big problem here is that this Agile organization is working across multiple Dunbar groups. And the organizational structure calls for governance, but they're Agile, so they're trying to use informal methods and not trying to use governance. Now the PMs, PMO, product owners, and Scrum Masters are all trying to manage the many, many dependencies, the different goals, and all of the funding. So they need status meetings, rules, and procedures because of the structure, but are being coached to be agile and use informal methods. So what we have here is some tension. The structure is calling for governance, and the coaching is going for agile. The funding goals and dependencies are not working well. So how do we fix this? In the next video, I'll describe better examples of how to structure your organization. Now in Part 3, I'll briefly dive into organizational sociology and the inverse Conway maneuver, and we can update the large organization that I just showed is in trouble. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in Part 2.